Good day, class. Here's another session on Intro to Research Methods. In today's lecture, we will focus on the following: presentation, analysis, and interpretation. These three form part of the requirements of the fourth chapter of the UL prescribed report. So let's begin with presentation. Presentation refers to the process of organizing data into logical, sequential, and meaningful categories and classifications to make them amenable to study and interpretation. So, presentation essentially is the process by which you lay down in an organized manner the data that you have gathered, be it qualitative or quantitative, observing logic, okay, and sequence and categorizations or classifications. Fundamentally, there are three ways of presenting data. First is by way of textual presentation, where we do statements with numerals or numbers that serve as supplements to tabular presentation. Another way to presenting your data is by tabular form. Tabular is a process by which you systematically arrange related idea in which classes of numerical facts or data are given each row and their subclasses are given each column in order to present the relationships of the sets or numerical facts of data in a definite, compact, and understandable form. Simply stated, tabular is a way to organize quantitative data observing rows and columns in order to present numbers or numerical facts in an organized way. There are two rules regarding the independence of tables and text. I mentioned earlier that text is a way to supplement the presentation of data in tabular form, meaning that in the fourth chapter, tabular presentation cannot stand alone. It has to be backed up by textual presentation in order to better, okay, understand the numerical data or the numerical facts that are presented. On that note, please remember these two general rules. First, the table should be constructed that enables the reader to comprehend the data presented without referring to the text. This means that the construction of the table should be in a way that it can be a standalone presentation of data, even without referring, okay, to the text that supplement the tabular presentation. So that's the first rule. Number two, the text should be so written that it allows the reader to understand the presented argument presented rather without referring to the table. This is by Campbell, Balu, and Slade in 1990. So if we will analyze the second rule, in the same way, the textual presentation, okay, should be comprehensible such that even without you looking at the table, you already have a very clear mental picture of what is written in text. So these are the two general rules whenever you deal with tabular presentation, and of course, the provision of text to supplement the numerical facts in table form. Here is an example of a statistical table. In fact, this slide would indicate the different parts of a statistical table. Always remember that if by requirement of your research study, you will be asked to prepare a table, it will appear pretty much like this. So a statistical table has the following parts. So we begin at the topmost part. So we have the table number followed by the title. And always remember that whenever you do titling, you always be guided by the so-called inverted pyramid format, especially when the title of the table is rather too lengthy, that the placement of the title is more than one line. For example, frequency and percentage distribution of respondents according to sex. So, as the title is written in two lines, then you will need to have it in the deductive, sorry, not deductive, but inverted pyramid format, where the first line is the longest and the last line is the shortest, thus resembling an inverted pyramid. Also part of a statistical table, especially when dealing with population and sample, is the indication of the sample or the population size below the title. I'd like you to remember, however, that whenever you are dealing with sample size, you will have it represented by a small letter n or lowercase n. So that's for sample size, lowercase n. But if you will be okay, uh, in doing a universe, okay, uh, or total enumeration, letter n should be in the uppercase format. So that is the difference between is small or lowercase n and capital N or uppercase N whenever we deal with sample or population. And then we have the heading. The heading is the first row that would indicate the categories or classifications, okay, of the numerical facts that are presented below. So that's for heading. So we have, for example, in the first row, sex, F, small f or lowercase f, uh, which actually is the symbol of frequency and the symbol of percentage. So that's for heading. And then we have the entries, okay, observing the heading that you have on the first row, okay, and these are what you refer to as the stubs, okay. So the stubs, okay, are this, okay, the entries that you have under the heading. And then we have part of the table just below the rows and the columns, okay, are the source note and footnote. What is the source note for? The source note is to refer your readers to where you have the data or the numerical data or the numerical facts taken from. And usually it forms part of your appendices. So you will need to have it indicated, okay, part of the statistical table under source, okay, the location, or the page where you can find the raw data where the numerical figures, okay, were taken from. Okay, so that is for source node. Then what about footnote? Footnote is that part of the statistical table that would explain further on what are the components or contents of the table, just like the symbols that you have used, such as uh, the lowercase f or frequency and the symbol for percentage. So these are the parts of a statistical table. So for example, you intend to determine the extent of readiness of some 50 accountancy students in terms of the CPA licensure examination, okay? And particularly along the subject areas using a 3-point rating scale. Or for business administration, for example, 50 business administration or HRM or tourism students in terms of the the results of the examination. They have part, okay, of their program of study, okay, using a 3-point Likert or rating scale. So this is how you will more or less, okay, organize your data or present your data in tabular form. So you have the table number, you have the title. Title reads examination readiness of accountancy students along the subject areas of the CPA licensure examination. And then down below, you have your sample size, which is 50. Again, it is a sample and not population, and therefore it is in lowercase n. And then we have the subject area, extent of readiness, which are categorized into HR, MR, and LR, which means highly ready, moderately ready, and least ready, respectively. And then we have mean and AD to mean adjectival description, all part of the heading. And then we now have the stubs. So the stubs now will comprise the different numerical data, okay, that you will need to reflect on the table. So we have for the first column under subject area are the subjects, okay? And then we have for the second column, which are subdivided into three sub columns, okay? One for HR, another for MR, and LR. So in this particular table, you will reflect, okay, or indicate how many of the 50 students or how many of the 50, okay, samples, okay, uh, responded, okay, HR or highly ready, MR for moderately ready, and LR for least ready. Okay, so uh, the objective is to uh, tabulate, okay, how many of the 50, okay, said that they are highly ready, how many mention, okay, that they are not highly ready but moderately ready, and those who have said that they're not ready or they're least ready. Okay, for example, in under auditing theory and problems, 15 of the 50 said they are highly ready, 30 said they are moderately ready, and 5, okay, of the 50, okay, said that they are least ready. So if we will have to sum up, 15 plus 30 plus 5, okay, total is 50. So all of them were properly accounted for. So you will need to check, okay, and recheck to ensure that you, okay, enter, okay, the right figures. Okay, so let's check. For example, 35 under accounting theory plus 10 and plus 5 is equal to 50. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. So meaning your tabulation was proper. What about prac 2? Okay, in the same way, prac 2 is also in order. What about prac 1? Here, we will note that there is a problem. Okay, the total is 51, which is 1 over, okay, the sample size, which is 50. But the question is, can we tolerate, okay, or are we going to allow, okay, 51 when the total sample is 50 for a single response question? What do I mean by single response question? A single response question is where the respondent will only have to answer one choice. One choice, it could be highly ready or moderately ready or least ready, but never to answer more than one. All right? So that is a problem. If it exceeds the total sample, then you go back to your tabulation. So there must be something wrong with your tabular presentation. What about MAS and BLT? 15 plus 15 plus 19, that is 49. But the question is that right? Are you going to allow number less than the total sample? The answer is perhaps, okay? It's possible that the number is less than the total sample, especially when some or one of the respondents did not answer this particular item. So that is allowed, but not over 50 because it is statistically improbable that we have more than the number of respondents, okay, the total, okay, of the responses in a single response question. Okay, so allow me to discuss further. So this now is your table, and then below that you have your legend. Under the legend you have the scale values. The scale values refer to uh, the assigned numerical values to the following. We have highly ready, moderate ready, least ready. You see, this uh, these classifications do not inherently possess a numerical value. Therefore, we have assigned specific values to represent them in order to allow a statistical analysis, such that HR is 3, MR 2, and LR 1. All right? So, uh, beside the scale is the statistical limit, which I will have to explain to you how it is determined. And then finally, for the last column, we have the adjectival description. So we move on to the next. Here, you will note that there are already uh, uh, that we already have provided, okay, the product of the number of responses like 15 and the value of the categories. Okay, so what we did was to multiply 15 and 3 to arrive at 45 for product. And the same process we did in the other. Well, except for this, because it is assumed that we have not noticed that there is something wrong, okay, with prac 1. But if you already have detected it right away, then you must have to have checked it right away in order to rectify the error. All right. So that is to begin with. Okay. So what we did was to get the product of each in order to prepare for the computation of the mean. Mean, by the way, is the uh, measure, okay, of central tendency that is after the uh, computation of the average. Okay, so the formula for mean is summation of the uh, of uh, the number, okay, and the values, okay, divided by the total number of sample. Okay, so for example, we get the summation meaning we sum up the product 45 plus 60 plus 5. Okay, so that gives us 110 divided by 15 plus 30 plus 5, 50. So 110 divided by 50. So that's how we have computed for the mean. Okay, so you have here 2.2, which is the quotient of 110 and 50. And the same process worked for the others. Well, except for prac 1 because you will need to check it. No, but for MAS and BLT, assuming that 19, 15, and 15 are the right numbers, then we can keep it as it is, right? So that is how we compute for the mean. And on the last column, we tried to check, okay, which of the three, okay, uh, is represented by the computed mean. So now we go back. Okay. So now we have now the statistical limits provided and how it is done. The statistical limits is is determined firstly by determining the range. Range is computed by getting the highest value, which is 3, and 1, so the difference. So we have uh, 3 minus 1, okay, is equal to 2 divided by the total number of values, which is 3. So that's 3 minus 1. So that's the highest value minus lowest value divided by the total number of values. So it gives us 0.667, something like that. So what is meant by 0.67? So what is the range for? The range is for the distances, okay, between each values. So if you will take a look at it, so we begin with 3. 3 minus 0.67, that gives you 2.33. Okay? And 2.33 minus 0.67 is 1.66. Okay? So here in the statistical limits, okay, we look into the lower range, sorry, lower and higher uh, limit. Okay? So we have for the first scale value, so we begin with 1. 1 because it is the lowest value and it's the lowest possible mean that can be computed. Remember that it is statistically improbable to arrive at a mean lower than 1 nor higher than 3. Always remember that. Okay? So it is statistically improbable to compute for a mean lower than 1, okay, nor higher than 3 in a 3-point Likert scale. Okay, in a 3-point Likert scale. Okay, so our lower limit is 1 and then we already have determined 1.66, no? Because the higher limit for the third is 3. Okay, so 3, then 2.33 for the higher limit for number 2, and the higher limit for number 1 is 1.66. Therefore, we just provide the missing values. So the lower limit is 1.67 for number 2, okay, because next in the number progression is 1.67, and then we have 2.33 and 2.34. Okay, so that's for the computation of the statistical limits, right? So that's how, okay, we were able to determine, okay, the corresponding adjectival descriptions. Now, we have mentioned two ways to present. We have textual, and then we have tabular. We have another one. We have graphical. Obviously, graphical is where we uh, provide charts, okay, to represent the quantitative variations or changes of the variables in pictorial or diagrammatic format. So these are the types of graphs and charts that we can use. It can be in the form of bar graph, linear, pie pictogram, statistical maps, or ratio charts. Okay, so that's for the three types of presentation: textual, we have uh, tabular, and then we have graphical. Now we move on to analysis. Analysis is the process of separation of a whole into its constituent parts, and this was provided in the Merriam-Webster dictionary in 2012. Okay, so it's a separation of a whole into its constituent parts. So we try to break down into its simpler units of analysis. Okay, some a whole. Okay, and it is also, according to Calderon in 1993, okay, is the breaking up, okay, of the whole study um, into simpler units of analysis according to the specific questions under the statement of the problem. So, how is analysis done? Analysis done based on Calderon's statement is with reference to the statement of the problem. Okay, so we take a look at this analysis, or this matrix, in order for us to give a better picture of how chapter 4 is to be presented. Okay, analyzed and interpreted, right? So this is now the correspondence between and among the different chapters of the UL prescribed report. So we have the first chapter in the first column, the third chapter in the second column, and the fourth chapter in the third chapter in the fourth. The third for the third column is chapter 4. So in chapter 1, okay, where we place the problem statement and has become the focus of our attention. Okay, so we specified the different the two parts of the statement of the problem, which are main and specific. Okay, that is uh, to emphasize that the problem statement begins with a general statement and followed by a specific set of problems. Okay, so you have the main and you have the specific. So it will vary, but ideally you have three subproblems, and therefore you have subproblem number one, subproblem number two, and subproblem number three. Now, in the third chapter, particularly in the data gathering procedure and analysis, okay, you will need to identify how subproblem one to subproblems one, two, and three will be analyzed and interpreted. Okay, so that's part of chapter three. Okay, so you will need to specify what are the data needed for each. Okay, data gathering procedure, and of course data analysis and interpretation. All right, so that will be for the explanation in the third chapter involving the subproblems. For obvious reasons, the main problem is actually addressed in the research method and a general discussion of the instrument and the data gathering procedure as well. So in the fourth chapter, okay, you will need to have it in terms of initially presentation by textual, tabular, or graphical way, and then followed by analysis, and then we have interpretation. So how do we now discuss this further? So for quantitative studies, okay, such as survey, okay, so here is how we deal with it. So research objectives, so sub-problem number one, okay. For example, the first sub-problem has to do with what is the level of competence, all right? And descriptive it being a descriptive survey, uh, since by the very nature of the objective, it will be uh, to summarize the opinion or the the responses, okay, of the responses, okay, and look into how it will be organized, okay, in order to allow analysis and interpretation. Okay, so we have under level of competence, response of respondents, or rating of subjects, for that matter, based on the results of the survey. So on the in the fourth chapter, so how is it done? So it is done in a tabular or textual way. Remember, in a quantitative study, we usually have it in a tabular form and then supplemented with textual form. Then what about sub-problem number two on factors? So in terms of factors, so it's similar. So factors influencing the level of competence, for example. So we have the response of the respondents or rating of the subjects, and then we have it also in tabular or textual form. And then we have the analysis and interpretation. Okay, and then sub-problem number three on proposed measures. Okay, this will be for your proposed measures, so that will be provided by the researchers based on the data regarding statement of the problem one, okay, and specific problem number two. So this will be mainly textual, uh, unless, okay, you will have it in tabular form, okay, or matrix form for that matter. So that is in quantitative studies. Then what about qualitative? Like for example, assessment. Okay, assessment or evaluative study. So we have, for example, status of inventory management. Okay, so we have, for example, data on procurement, warehousing, and issuance. Okay, and then we have data that are gathered by way of an interview and observation. So the presentation in the fourth chapter, okay, is textual and therefore uh, followed by followed up by analysis and interpretation. Okay. In the same way, as for problems involving inventory management, so we have data on problems as perceived by the subject. We have interview and observation, and then it's the same. Okay. And then we have for proposed measures similar to what I have discussed earlier. So this is just to explain how is the organization of the fourth chapter with the title uh, presentation, analysis, and interpretation of data. Okay, so if you have three subproblems, then therefore you will need to have three sections, main sections in the fourth chapter, okay, uh, to correspond with the set of subproblems. All right. So that's how we do it. And always remember that the fourth chapter is the most important part of any research report. Therefore, you give much of attention on the fourth chapter more than the other chapters. No, but actually, you need to give equal billing to all the five chapters because these are equally important. But of course, I'd like to point it out that the fourth chapter is the meat of the report. Okay. So on that note, allow me to proceed by pointing out that there are two ways of analyzing data. These are uh, qualitative and quantitative. So qualitative is not based on precise measurements and quantitative claims, obviously, but it will be more of description. Okay. And examples of qualitative analysis are social analysis or analyzing it from the biggest to the smallest. Okay, we have to note of what's most important and the least important, uh, rank of the students according to brightness, and so on and so forth. Okay, while quantitative is employed on data that have been assigned some numerical values. Okay, so I think I already have mentioned about quantitative uh, data. Okay, in so far as research is concerned, and so if we have quantitative data, it is but fitting and proper that we have to provide quantitative analysis, so which can range from the examination of simple frequencies to the description of events or phenomenon using the two types of statistics that I have discussed or mentioned to you earlier. We have descriptive statistics and to the investigation of correlation and causal hypotheses using various inferential statistics or statistical tests, right? And then comes interpretation. So this is now the dividing line between analysis and interpretation. So what we analyze are the data. Okay, an interpretation actually are the meanings that we place to what we have analyzed for quantitative and or qualitative data. So I hope that by now it's clear with you the delineation between analysis and interpretation. So interpretation is the meaning that you provide to the quantitative and qualitative data. So this section answers the question, so what if these are the data, okay, in relation to the results of the study? So what do the results of the study mean? So that this part is perhaps the most critical aspect of the research report. I'd like to highlight it once again. Perhaps this is the most important or the most critical aspect of the research report. So it is often said that the most difficult to write, okay, is the interpretation part because it is list structured, meaning uh, it will depend on what data, okay, you have analyzed. So this section demands perceptiveness and creativity from the researcher. Okay, so how do you interpret the results of your study? Okay, so these are some of the tips, okay, that are helpful in so far as the interpretation is concerned. Number one is to tie up the results of the study in both theory and application by pulling together the conceptual or theoretical framework, the review of literature, and studies potential significance for application. So you have your review of related literature. In some, you have to some you have your conceptual or theoretical framework. Okay, so this will now uh, be part of your interpretation. You will need to tie it up the results of your study to your framework or to your review of related literature or to the potentiality of the study for application purposes. For example, okay, it was found out that in terms of the uh, readiness of the students, okay, you have found out that they excel on this particular subject, and this and a similar study, okay, uh, support this particular result, and therefore you will need to do some cross referencing. So that is now the so-called cross referencing or or corroboration. Okay, so you will need to cross reference your work to the work of others to support your results. Okay, so that is corroboration. So number two, you will need to examine, summarize, interpret, and justify the results, then draw inferences. So what is an inference? Inference is your your tentative conclusion that's based on your uh, prior knowledge. Okay, and you will need to consider number one, conclusion or summarizing. Okay, so this technique enables the reader to get the total picture of the findings in summarized form and helps orient the reader to the discussion that follows. Or and interpret. So questions on the meaning of the findings, the methodology, the unexpected results, and the limitations and shortcomings of the study should be answered and interpreted. And then integration, integrate. So there is an attempt to put the pieces together. So you try to, as if you are doing a jigsaw puzzle, where uh, you carefully, okay, uh, place each piece of the jigsaw into a meaningful picture. Okay, and often the results of a study are disparate and do not seem to hang together. So you will need to put them all uh, to uh, into creating one picture. Okay, so in the discussion, attempt to bring the findings together to extract meaning and principles. Right. So do not have it on a one-on-one correspondence for the data and the meaning. So it has to be with also with reference to the different data, okay, in the study. And then you theorize. So you theorize. Okay. So when the study includes a number of related findings, it occasionally becomes possible to theorize. Okay. So theorizing is also a way to do some inferences. So to sum it up, okay, you will need to integrate your findings into a principle, integrate the theory into your findings, and use these findings to formulate an original theory. Okay, so that's how the process works for theorizing. Integrate your findings into a principle. Remember that a theory is a set of interrelated principles that will provide more or less an explanation, okay, to a phenomenon or to an event. Okay, so integrate a theory into your findings and then use these findings to formulate an original theory. And then the next is to recommend or apply alternatives. Recommend or uh, apply alternatives. Okay, so in deducing interpretation from statistical analysis, okay, the following keywords or phrases may be useful. So when doing interpretation from inferential statistics, so you will have these words or phrases uh, uh, be these are helpful phrases and words that you can use in the analysis and in the interpretation. So, for example, table number one presents the blank. Table number blank indicates the what. Okay, so as reflected in the table. So try uh, to stylize. Okay, do not be boring. Do not always start it with table number one presents. Okay, or it's always the same, okay, introductory uh, or transitional phrases that you use. Okay, try to be more uh, be more um, uh, innovative. Okay, try to stylize. So the illustrative graph above below shows that you have to be very careful with the use of above and below, because sometimes when your layout, okay, when you revise your manuscript, okay, sometimes the pages adjust as well. Okay, so you will need to check every now and then the use of the word above or below. In explaining this result, it can be stated that, okay, or is significantly related to or is found to be determinant of or registered positive correlation with. So you have to play with words. Okay? You just need to play with words. Is revealed to influence, has significant relationship with, is discovered to be a factor of, no, or in relation with the result of, it may be constructed that. So these are the possible ways by which you can um, have, a more uh, interesting, interesting analysis, interpretation or analysis, and in viewing in this sense, it can be, and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of ways by which you can uh, start your sentences or paragraphs. Okay, and here's more. Okay, and more. Okay, so Saavedra in 1997 gives some guidelines in the presentation, analysis, and interpretation of data. So number one, the chapter is organized and divided into several main components or topics, each of which is titled according to the subproblem or hypothesis statement. I already have mentioned that. So the fourth chapter will be organized uh, on the basis of the subproblem. So if you have three subproblems, so there will be three main sections. You will need to present only relevant data. Okay, that's for obvious reasons. Okay, we do not account for that which are not, okay, pertinent to our study. In reporting data, you choose the medium that will present them effectively. The medium that is referred to here is uh, the different types of presentation. It can be in the form of textual or tabular or graphical, or in graphical. So what's the most appropriate? This is bar graph, line graph, and so on and so forth. So presenting tables that can be presented as well in a few sentences in the text must be avoided. Okay, so you will need to expound on your chapter 4. Okay, um, it should be, ideally speaking, no, the part of the report that's having the most number of pages compared with the four other chapters. Okay, the textual presentation should supplement or expand the contents of the tables and charts rather than duplicate them. Remember, okay, the idea is not to duplicate. Okay, it is to discuss further. Okay, and only objective data embodied in tables are made the basis of discussion. Okay, so you have to be very careful on this. So sometimes you uh, borrow words from other studies that do not really apply to your study or that have not been part of your study after all. Okay, so you have to be very careful about that. The analysis of the data should be objective and logical. In analyzing and interpreting data, point out those that are consistent or inconsistent with the theory presented in the study's theoretical framework. So here now is where you do the cross-referencing and the corroboration that I have mentioned in the earlier discussion. In reporting, statistical tests of significance include information concerning the value of the test, the degree of freedom, the probability level, and the direction of the effect. So this is when we are now um, uh, analyzing and interpreting results involving hypotheses. The findings are compared and contrasted with that of other previous studies, and interpretations are made thereof. So corroboration, okay, is done, or cross-referencing, right? So I guess that's about it for today. So we will have to continue our discussion in the succeeding meetings. Okay, but for now, I'd like you to uh, review what you have initially for data and for purposes of writing your chapter 4. Good day, everyone. God bless.